Welcome to the On Assignment podcast, brought to you by Mobilize Man, where our mission is to train and mobilize men who actively and intentionally pursue God's assignment on their life. I'm your host, John Harvey. My co-host, Will Derlick, is actually on assignment today, unavailable to be here. But we have a guest who I'm excited to have on this show. I'm so honored to have him here. And our guest today is actually my pastor, Pastor Ben Rose. Ben, welcome.
Awesome. So good to be here.
Yeah. So a little introduction with Ben Rose. Ben Rose's son, Taylor Rose, was on an earlier episode of the On Assignment podcast, and we actually just had a great time with him. And so now we're blessed to have Papa Rose with us, the father figure in that family. And Ben Rose is from Juneau, Alaska. He's married to Heather Rose, where they've been married 23 years. And Ben has been our pastor for 6 years. And I've just loved seeing him lead, watching him grow. And if you met the Rose family, there's just no doubt that their lives have been just impacted by the grace of God and what God has just, they've been so open to God's work in their lives. And it's just impressive to see. I'll just say that. So they have 3 children. They have Ashton, Taylor, and Macy. ATM, that's right. Yep. Ben and Heather are the lead pastors at the Collective Church. Ben is the founder of the organization called Cross the Island, which is an organization that helps people discover and walk in sexual integrity.
That's right.
And they offer coaching and different courses that really are vital in this area of sexual integrity in the lives of people. Ben is an avid golfer. He loves to golf. I also know that he's an outdoorsman. Ben is a musician. He's a great communicator. He literally is like this guy who's so well-rounded. I love it. Whereas, for me, I'm like good at pounding nails, but I couldn't play a guitar to save my life or the keyboards or anything else. But so it's great to have you on the show with us, Ben. And today we're going to actually talk about a subject that I believe, and I know that Ben, you believe this as well, is absolutely vital to our country, our world moving forward. And that is how do we as men lead our families in a way to where our children have pure hearts before God?
Yeah.
How do we actually lead our own lives, lead our families in a way that is so counter to the way that the world is moving right now in this area of sexual purity?
Yeah.
The statistics are staggering. The average age of exposure to pornography right now, and the latest stat that I read was 11 years old, and that number is going down.
Yeah, I've heard 8 years old too.
8 years old.
Yeah,
which is staggering.
Yeah.
They say that about 70% of teenagers right now are active online with pornography and are hiding that online activity from their parents.
Yeah.
The CDC says that the 55% of teenagers 15 to 19 years old are sexually active. And you begin to look at the numbers, and you begin to look at the numbers of men who are not only actively engaged with pornography, but who that element of their lives controls them and their decision making. And we just see this devastating impact on the family, on our country. And so the topic that we're covering today, how do we as fathers raise children who have this heart of purity, is so important. And Ben, you've got, I think that I really look at you as kind of a forerunner in this movement towards purity. And you've helped so many men actually come into a place where they're living with sexual integrity. And I've also watched you father your own kids in such an amazing way. I have so much respect for you. Your son, Ashton, just got engaged to a beautiful young lady,
Amazing.
Annabelle. And so I'm excited to have you on the show today.
Yeah.
It's really good, and I'm looking forward to what you have to say. And so, what would be some things that you could tell us about your story that would help connect you with the guys who are listening?
Yeah. My story is unwanted discovery at 8 years old, second grade. um, you know, I like to call it unwanted discovery because it carries the thought of I didn't go looking for something,
Right.
but the enemy was coming looking for me.
Hmm.
And that's how sin is, and that's how this warped sexual, um, you know, epidemic that we're dealing with is the enemy is trying to twist and warp something that God created.
Yeah.
We always say that we're not ashamed to talk about what God was not ashamed to create,
Right.
and
That's
it's
good.
it's His idea. Sex is so powerful. It's so beautiful. In fact, in our new young men's course, I spend, I think, a couple weeks on just talking about the beauty of sex
Hmm.
and but the power of it and how the enemy, hijacks it.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so my story was, I had a sexualized experience with another young boy, 8 years old. Come to find out later in counseling is not uncommon. It's just two boys that are curious,
Yeah.
and because we hadn't been sexually discipled, and that's a word we're going to use a lot. um you know we didn't know, we had no context for what was happening.
Right.
We just knew that we were both, things were happening in our bodies and things were happening with attraction, and so we just decided that we were going to explore some things. And the instant that happened, I shame entered,
Yeah.
and a door was open, and the hook of the enemy got in me. For the next 25 years it controlled my life. And so I live like very incongruent. So this is like public Ben, loved Jesus. I mean, I really did love, I love the Lord. I knew I was called to ministry. I knew God had something special on my life. I loved people. I wanted to serve the Lord. I didn't want to rebel. I didn't want to backslide. I didn't want to do all those things. I wanted to serve the Lord. But there was this hidden part to my life that felt so incongruent, and so I grew up so duplistic.
That's so, and that's, I have a similar story
Yeah,
myself. And the way that you feel knowing that there's stuff in the background as a boy,
yeah,
even at a prepubescent boy,
yeah,
there's stuff going on in the background that your parents don't know about, that no one knows about. It, it it's such an amazingly difficult thing to go through as a boy because it brought such confusion to
yeah,
me. And so, yeah, I can totally relate with what you're talking about there. That duplistic nature. It's kind of
yeah.
like everything looks good on the outside. Everyone's like, "Oh, what a great kid." But
Yes,
yet whenever they say that, that there's this prick in your conscience of like that's not really the case.
yeah. If you only knew me,
Yeah.
which further drives home the thought of like I can't tell anybody.
Yeah.
And especially like and we'll probably talk about this later on the show, but um, we didn't. I don't think my parents had any tools
Mm-mm.
in their tool bag because this was a very not talked about subject, and well-meaning children's pastors and well-meaning youth pastors would say things that I feel would almost drive the shame even deeper.
Mm-hmm.
And so you just purpose in your heart that I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to whip this thing. I'm going to get my stuff together. Or you put some milestones out there and say, when I graduate high school, when I go to college, when I get married, when I find the woman of my
Right.
dreams. And then what's amazing with that whole line of thinking is like those milestones just get pushed.
Yeah.
When we have kids, I'll stop.
Yeah.
You know, when I have a daughter,
Right.
that'll stop.
Yeah.
And what we find is that anything left in the darkness grows and produces all of the things that we don't want in life.
That's right. Yeah.
Destruction grows in the
Yeah.
darkness. And so, yeah, so my story is I just 25 years and lived in a small town, never acted in, which, is kind of a therapeutic term for didn't have relations with anybody else. Um, would say I had some emotional affairs, where my heart got attached. And again, I was really scared because we lived in a small town. I was scared to get in trouble, which is such a weird, concept. I had a fear of punishment.
Okay.
So that
That
in a weird way kept me, I think, from acting out.
Yeah.
Um,
There's such a sense of like having to create those facades to where it's like the more I can appear to be good in front of other people, the less chance of them discovering what's going on behind the scenes. And the fear of being punished was also like, if I ever actually acted out, which it's interesting because when there was opportunities to act out where it wouldn't be discovered, there was no recourse. I was 100% in until God did a work in my heart, even as a young boy. It was like there was opportunities with young girls to, that were older than me actually, to do things that let me take further steps into that sexual sin that continued to kind of get a hold of me deeper and deeper. And, once that barbed hook was in me, it really took a supernatural work of God at my life at 16 to really change that. So I can totally relate with what you're saying.
Yeah. And it's so good. And I would say that in high school that, I was, I wanted to be a light on campus, while I was messing around with girls too.
Yeah.
So that was like pretty incongruent again.
Yeah.
And so you're just duplistic, confusion, anger at yourself. A lot of times parents will, my wife and I say parents in 2025, a lot of parents have cranial rectitis and their heads are buried pretty far, let's say in the sand for the podcast sake.
Yeah.
But we, and they're just like, my son is so angry and my son is so moody. And instantly, and they'll say things like, they just after school, they just have to go in their room and just spend time on their phone to decompress. And I'm over here going, they're on pornography.
Right.
And the moodiness is because they're frustrated with their self. Because at the end of the day, nobody wants to be addicted to sexual sin.
Right.
Like you're a slave to a master.
Yes. Yeah.
And the enemy stands at the edge of a cliff and he baits you and he's like, it's okay, and no one will know, no one will find out. And then you trip and fall over the edge. And then he turns around and begins to mock you and begins to throw accusation at you. And so, I think to myself, like, this is the anger, because anger is a false sense of control. And when you're in sexual sin, you feel like you're out of control. And moodiness, a lot of times it's self-directed, and there has to be an outlet for that at some point. And usually it comes towards families. Usually that moodiness and the anger comes towards families. So that totally makes sense to me.
Yeah.
But so 25 years. And then finally, I was like, we felt called to plant a church in Portland. My wife and I were pastoring at this time. We had three little kids. And again, I had told myself that when I got married, I could stop. When I had Ashton, I'm just like, there is no way that I'm going to bring a son into this world and be addicted to this stuff. And we have Ashton. 3 months later, I find myself sneaking off, to the computer room next door, in the room next door. And so it's like, went to the altar a million times, to ask for God for forgiveness, to take this from me. So fast forward, we moved to Portland, Oregon, and this, because that's going to fix it, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so we moved here, and a small town boy who, you go to Fred Meyer in Juneau and you hug 12 people. It's just everybody. It's 32,000 people, and now I'm in the city of 2.2 something million people, right? And
it's like the strip club capital of the
strip club. And I'm driving around town and just like seeing all of these, like, just like fresh meat to the devil. It feels like, and so I spiraled out. I would go to strip clubs, and, I would leave really quickly. I would feel so bad while I was there, but the thrill and the excitement of going there, and I would leave, and I would like convince myself that somehow I was like a Joseph leaving Potiphar's.
Oh, wow.
like why was I there in the first place? Right. So I'm talking cloud of deception.
Yes.
I'm just
Yeah.
deceived. And what was crazy was that God was working and using me in the midst of this, and we were developing a team to launch this church, and people are coming to the Lord, and I'm having words of knowledge, and the family goes to sleep, and I go for a drive and go find somewhere,
Yeah.
and so so now we're talking like this level of like incongruency is growing.
Yeah.
And it's getting more intense and more extreme. Fast forward 7 months, I'm just spiraling out. And my family can feel it. My wife can feel it. She could probably feel it our whole marriage to a degree. She knew that there was some sense of separation. It might not have been the Great Wall of China,
Right.
but it was like saran wrap.
Yeah.
But that's still something in between.
Yeah.
Right.
That point's always there whenever
Yes.
she tries to get through it. It's like, what's going on? Yeah.
Yeah. And so finally, it was wild. I actually watched a documentary on the life of Ted Haggard, and it was an HBO documentary, and the Holy Spirit used that. I mean, it scared me.
Yeah. For the listener out there who may not know who Ted Haggard was, he was a pastor in Colorado who had one of the nation's largest churches at the time.
He was called America's Pastor.
Yeah. He was the president of the American Evangelical Church Association.
Yep.
Just an incredible leader and man of influence, and looked, again, he had this disparity in his life, these things going on behind the scenes that were devastating and devastated him, his marriage and his ministry.
Yeah. I mean, for the listener, like he was the guy that, CNN at night, they would have him come on and comment on what was going on in the world and in politics and in religion. And he was caught with drugs and with a male prostitute.
Mm-hmm.
And that just shows you like where sin wants to take you, unchecked. And when the hook wants to drag you to hell, it takes you further than you wanted to go, costs you more than you were willing to pay, and keeps you longer than you wanted to stay. And so I watched that, but what I watched and I heard about his life was that when he was young, the hook got in, and he was actually in a play, and he played a female role in a play. So a door was opened, and the enemy used something to get a hook inside of him, and he never told anybody, and he didn't feel like he could tell anybody.
Right.
And so then this thing just festered, and he I think what we need to understand too as men is that there's a grenade, and when we pull the pin on the grenade, with this kind of behavior, like it's going to go off.
Yeah.
And we don't get to control the shrapnel.
Right. Yes.
So,
it's so devastating. And I look at the impact on the lives of men who I've seen walk through marital affairs, who've walked through, this unfaithfulness with their wives, the sexual sin. I see it in my own life, and the impact is so much greater than we would ever imagine in that moment of making that decision, just to pursue pleasure just for a moment, and then to get back and and feel like, oh, well, I prayed about it, I asked God to forgive me, and now I'm moving forward and things are okay.
Yeah.
And you're exactly right. The shrapnel, the effect of that decision is devastating. And it's also devastating. So it's not just a self thing. It's not just about me. It's about my wife, my family, my legacy.
Yeah.
It's about God himself, how just it hurts his heart, and how he's got so much more for us. And yet we're just, it reminds me of the story of Jacob and Esau, when Esau sells his birthright for a pot of lentil soup.
Some beans.
We're literally like in that moment giving our birthright away. It could be, that's a picture of the decision we make for something as silly as a pot of beans, to give your whole birthright away, your whole inheritance away. And we're giving up so much for just a moment of pleasure. And so Yeah, it's devastating. You're right, but that's a great picture of pulling the pin and expecting it not to
Yeah.
do anything.
No, and thankfully, like, we still have God's mercy and grace, and
Yeah,
I believe that, you know, we don't get what we deserve, you know. But it is. I think even sometimes when we don't, because I thought I was getting away with it,
right. Yeah,
because like there was fruit in the ministry, and
right.
I was like, I think I'm getting away with this, and I don't think I would have ever told anybody that, but maybe
Right.
that's like a core belief that was happening.
Yeah.
And so,
Interesting.
but then I just, because like one part of my life is experiencing fruit, so that means like, so there's just kind of like these, again, deception,
Mm-hmm. Right.
so deceptive because you don't know you're deceived,
Yeah, that's right.
And so, but man, I watched that documentary, and then the Lord used some men that were in my life to start like a really Holy Spirit inspired conversation the next day, to the point where I was just like, I actually ran to the bathroom because I felt like I was going to vomit. And then on the drive back to the office, I started the process of confession, and
Wow.
which lasted about a month, and I'll be really honest with you. People are like, Ben, you're so awesome, and you're so like, way to go, being, awesome in disclosing this. Man, my first disclosure, I lied. I tried to put myself in a better light. I told some truth, but I told some partial truth.
Mm,
So I told the iceberg. I shared the 30% above the water, and 70% of the ice was still under the water.
interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
And then think just the goodness of God, and and the whole thing came out about a month later,
Okay.
4 days before we launched a church.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so we launched a church, and then 10 days later after that we were fired, and it
Okay.
was the worst, best time of our life. And I think this leads us kind of what we're going to be talking about today. So that's some
Yeah.
context of like I got some serious feedback for my actions.
Yeah.
I lost my job.
Yeah.
We lost finances. Lost influence, lost credibility with a lot of people. Um, but gained the whole world.
Yeah.
Gained freedom. Gained integrity. Gained my family back.
Yeah.
Gained intimacy. And I'm really thankful that my kids were younger during this time. And so the Lord really allowed this time to kind of shape my wife and I.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then also we just went on a mission to, like, how can we disciple our kids?
Yeah.
How can we pull the covers back on this thing and expose, what was done to me?
Yes.
And that, what's interesting, John, is that um, my like confession, and I went to counseling for 2 years. I went through a restoration process, and we got, we had pastors that helped walk us through as well. And then our counselor was a former pastor himself, and I walked through that for 2 years. And me saying yes to that, part way through that process, my wife is like, wait a second, like, I'm sexually broken too,
Hmm.
and I wasn't sexually discipled, and I've got all these wrong views
Hmm.
about sexuality and intimacy. And so both of us had to, like, um, go back to God's word and God's plan, and like we both had to expose the lies, and we
Yeah.
both had to walk through, you
That's,
know,
yeah.
really disclosure, transparency, the light.
Yeah.
And but it set what it did is it set us on, and this is like what I'm super passionate about. And I thank you for having me on today, and your heart for men, John, is beautiful at the Collective Church and beyond the Collective Church. It's to equip and to empower and to mobilize.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm hoping today does, because it really set us on a path of how can we raise our kids differently
Yeah.
than we were raised.
Yeah. Yeah. If there is not a shift, then we will see. I just, if there's not a shift, we will see the fall of family. We'll see the fall of our nation. I mean, it's
Yeah.
the things that are coming out in out of the darkness, his secrets are revealed, and these underground movements are beginning to become revealed, and the number of men who are engaged, not just in pornography, but in pedophilia and
Yes,
just
trafficking.
we're just seeing just this, the trafficking, the depravity is just so deep.
Yeah,
It can feel almost like when you hear about things, and then first of all, when you see your own struggle, and you're
yeah,
like, it's a very, very difficult struggle, and then you begin to see what's going on around the world. It begins to feel very hopeless.
yeah,
And part of what I want to do today is make sure that every man who's listening out there understands that there's hope, and there's hope in Jesus. There's hope in his work in your life for complete freedom, for complete healing, and for complete restoration
yeah,
of those things that he has given to you as gifts. And so there's hope out there. And what I've seen in Pastor Ben and in Heather is this walking out of that hope, and their ability to share at such a transparent level things that most men would never want to talk about, most people would never want to bring into the public realm. I've just seen so many lives changed forever by that transparency. But I've also seen a fight that says, we're not there yet, and we're still in the battle. We're still fighting for this. We're still walking in a place of freedom and
yeah,
pursuing God, and so there's hope out there for every listener.
yes,
But it takes you going to that deep place. You have to understand that you can't just go about life business as usual and expect for there to be freedom.
hmm
The work of freedom takes investment of time, energy, money,
intentionality.
intentionality. It's like wrestling. And if you've
Yeah,
ever wrestled, there's no point in a wrestling match where you don't have to just kind of be fully engaged, locked in, and 100%,
yeah,
because we are wrestling against principalities and powers that are clearly at work in the lives of millions and millions of people with devastating effect. And that cycle of brokenness is one that goes from generation to generation, from
yeah,
father to son to daughter. And it just, this cycle continues, and as it continues to pervade on the world scene, there's a need for this breakthrough as a clarion call out there to men that there's hope.
yeah,
It's going to take a deep work, but if you can break through and take down these giants by God's grace and by he'll give you everything you need to do it. It can impact the lives of your children.
yeah,
And I think if there's one thing that's going to resonate within the heart of a father, it's that your children are they're in the crosshairs of the enemy to be taken down the same way that he's been trying to take you down. But there's a way for you to be able to actually have influence in their lives and lead
yeah.
them in such a way to where they don't have to go through the same things that you did.
That's right.
And so with that being said, in your thinking, what is like the unique role that a father plays in this role as shaping his children's sexual worldview? Like, what's the unique role that a father plays, and how can a father step into that role?
Yeah, I think the father plays such a role in identity, in who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say this to the dads out there. Um, 2 Peter 1 verse 3 says, "By his divine power, God has given us everything we need for living a
Yes.
godly life. We have received all of this by coming to know him, the one who's called us to himself by means of his marvelous glory and excellence." So number one, that you have everything that you need inside of you.
That's right.
It's actually already there,
Yeah.
because of your union with Christ Jesus. And so I think sometimes we just have to, you almost have to like just embrace that and
Yeah.
say, you know what, God, I've not in my own strength, but with the Holy Spirit and with my union with you, I have everything that I need. And I'm their dad for a reason.
Yeah. That's right.
This is not by happenstance. This
Yeah.
isn't by accident. You didn't say, whoops, I gave this kid a dad that is just going to blow it his whole life. And, shame, if we allow shame and, this feeling of, because the enemy wants us to, he is always wanting to make us feel unqualified.
Mm-hmm.
He's always wanting us to feel that we don't have what it takes,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and he's always trying to keep us from the Father, from our Father,
Yeah.
and from our own identity, so that so that we're stuck in, repeating the same cycles as our past, generations. So I think the identity is so key. It's so important. I think the intimacy, Heather and I teach on this concept of kind of 6 areas, 6 pillars of intimacy. There's other people that teach on this as well, but this idea of physical intimacy. Intimacy, like to a lot of people, is just sex
Right.
and sexuality.
Yeah.
But there's really, I think, really 5 more areas, and that's emotional, that's spiritual, recreational, physical, and financial.
Yeah.
And there's probably some more that you can come up with, but we've kind of distilled it down to those 6. And so I feel like as a dad, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to speak into their identity. I'm trying to hold the crown over their head and speak to the king and the queen inside of each of them.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to, and my wife is so good at this, John, she is so good at connecting to their hearts.
Yeah.
And, she like saw into the future prophetically and was like, if I don't listen and connect with them on levels of intimacy on what seems like insignificant now, then when they're 13, 14, 15, we're not going to be able to connect on what is really, really significant.
Yeah.
And so I think as a dad, what I'm always trying to do, always makes me sound so awesome, but what I'm trying to keep at the forefront of my mind is how can I be building, strengthening the pillars of intimacy with my boys.
Yeah.
The physical intimacy, making sure that they're hugged and they're kissed and they're loved,
Yeah.
from earliest of age. Recreationally, that we are doing things together. Emotionally, that I'm actually exposing how I feel about things, because I want them to tell me, intimacy. I'm wanting to hear really what's on their heart. Some of that is asking good questions. Our mutual friend and co-laborer in church and in different ministries, Bob Donnelly, once told me, he said, asking your kids how was your day is like the worst question.
Right.
How was your day?
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
It's like good.
Right.
And so he really, that set me on a little bit of a journey to ask better questions, emotionally. And then spiritually, I want to make sure that I'm praying with my kids. And dads, you're like, I don't know what to say. We just simply taught our kids prayer is talking to God. So we just wanted to make sure that we normalized spiritual things in the home. If somebody was sick, we are going to pray for them. If we heard about somebody, family member,
Yeah.
A friend, somebody, we're going to stop. We're going to pray. We're going to believe God for things as a family. So building spiritual intimacies, recreation, we're going to have fun. We're going to do things together. Anyways, so that you kind of getting the point. You're like, well, what does this have to do with sexuality? It has everything to do with it, because if we can build these intimacies, then we can connect to their heart, and then we can begin to talk about things that if these things aren't being fed, if these intimacies aren't being fed, it feels really awkward just to go, hey, can I talk to you about sex?
Yeah.
But we haven't been connecting
Yep.
on any other level.
That's really, really good.
So I think for a dad, let's focus on their identity, always speaking to who we know that God created them to be, and ask the Lord for a picture.
Yeah.
Sometimes we can't see it in the natural.
That's right.
Ask the Lord for a picture of who your son is becoming or your daughter is becoming, and then begin to speak into that. I remember so clearly, my parents would speak a lot of identity to me and who I was, and my righteousness and my standing with the Father. And I knew that my natural standing with my parents, I felt very secure with my dad, and I was telling a group of guys yesterday at a retreat that my dad, like, if the burrito in the fridge said dad, I would eat the burrito in the fridge. I'd go into my dad's closet and take his clothes. If the sign on his door on his office said like in a meeting, I would still go. Like, I just felt like I had full access to my dad.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Which is great. so I think that this identity of that we carry, that so I had this view that I could that I could go to my father, at any time. And what that did, I think what that did for me, not sexually though. This is where the void was,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't blame my parents. I honor my
Sure.
parents, but I want to be honest that they both had, my mom came from a really rough home and very broken home. My dad came from this place where his parents, at one point in their marriage, they actually divorced. There was affairs. By the grace of God, they got back together, and remarried. And I knew my parents as the mall walkers that spoke scripture and prayed for the family.
Right.
But there was sexual brokenness in the family. So my dad and mom weren't discipled in this area. So there was a void in this area. And, but I remember distinctly being in a van for baseball. I was traveling with a team, and I remember, wanting to be accepted by the guys and wanting to, and they were just talking foul and, all the
Mm-hmm.
sexual
Yeah.
innuendos and I remember thinking, this is not who I am. I
Yeah.
don't fit.
Right.
This doesn't feel right. And so I remember that moment, and that's what I wanted for my boys. Is I wanted not to be like the sin police and the moral
Mm-hmm.
police.
Right.
I wanted my boys and my daughter to get into environments and saying, this doesn't feel right. This
Yeah.
doesn't feel like sonship.
Yeah.
This doesn't feel like daughterhood. This doesn't
Mm-hmm.
feel like the identity that's been placed on
Yeah.
me. So that's, as a father, I think that identity is so important. And then building those pillars, because those pillars build the foundation that's able to handle disclosure, that's able to handle walking in the light and all those things.
Yeah.
So
That's really so good. Will you tell the guys what kind of your family mantra is that you gave your, not mantra, but that identity piece, to where it's like you would tell your boys this and your daughter this
yeah,
consistently?
we would tell them, I would just tell them, you're a mighty man of God, you're a champion, you're a mouthpiece to your generation, you're a leader of men, you're a follower of Jesus, you're a man of integrity, you're a man of character. And then it would go on, but those were the consistent
Yeah.
ones,
Yeah.
and then we are the roses. We love each other. We serve each other. We do hard things,
Yes. Yeah.
and
So,
that would come back to bite us too. When mom and I wouldn't be doing hard things, the
yeah.
kid would be like, I thought we did hard things. It's
Yeah.
like,
That's great accountability, isn't it? But I say that because, if you didn't come from a structured home, you wouldn't know sometimes about what it is to structure something like that,
yeah,
to where it's like you and your wife, or if you're, a single dad with custody of your kids at times,
yeah,
you write out, you pray about it and say, Lord, what do I want to give
yes,
my kids as an identity? And
yeah,
write it out, and then just begin to just declare that over them. I mean, and not declare it like in a weird way, but that's what you want to begin to speak into them consistently when you're engaging with them,
yeah,
to where they actually can take that on, and that's something that will come to mind to them when they're in a place where it's like, boy, I really don't want to do this. This seems hard. Well, I do hard
do
things,
hard things. Yeah,
or what, I really don't want to speak up now. I feel like I should. Well, you're a mouthpiece to your generation.
yeah,
Speak up.
yeah,
Those types of things help define them in ways that cause them to believe truly in their core about who they are.
yeah,
And you've spoken that into them. So take some time, pray it out, and then write it out, and actually begin to be very intentional with what you speak over your children
yeah.
as to who they are. And I also find it interesting, like for me in my own personal journey, I found it very easy to talk to my kids about certain subjects
Hmm.
that I was comfortable with, that I felt that I was familiar with, that I understood well, and I could actually talk to them and lead them in it. When it came to other subject matter, though, it was really hard for me to have a good discussion with them, because I felt inept, or I felt very much a lack of confidence in certain areas to have discussions with my son or my daughters. And so when you're talking about these 6 areas of intimacy, how would you like talk to a guy when he's like, I don't have any idea how to talk to my son or daughter about spiritual things, or because I don't really know the Bible real well, or about sexual things because I'm already struggling enough as it is. how would you encourage a guy to approach those types of conversations when it comes to the conversation, but also building that type of intimacy with your kids?
Yeah, I think that, this is a saying that I say all the time at nauseum at church, but like faith expressed is grace released.
Yeah.
Sometimes we just have to do it.
Mm.
And when we do it and we ask the Holy Spirit to be with us, he's there.
Yeah.
And it's uncomfortable,
Yeah.
especially in an area where you feel like you're failing,
Yeah.
and it, you know, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. And
Yes.
so,
Yeah.
for me, like here I am, like teaching this course on marriage and stuff, and still have my own struggles, and we still have our own struggles in
Yeah.
marriage because we're human and we're still walking out sanctification. But the Lord just kind of showed me, hey Ben, you guys have conquered some giants, and so you're a little bit further down the road, and
Yeah.
so we can be a guide. I don't want to be God.
Yeah.
We can be a
Yeah.
guide. And so I think that, I mean, our stories are super important too, John, at age appropriate levels.
Yeah.
If our kids are just hearing, don't do that, you shouldn't do that,
Right.
that's bad. That's, or they hear the parents talking about some of these issues only in a negative light. Oh, so and so got her pregnant, and this. Oh, they had
Right.
this, and they're getting divorced because he cheated on. Like some of even like conversation like that. That's my kids hear everything.
Yes.
My parents
Yeah.
used to call me Big Ears because
Okay.
I'd come out of the bedroom and I'd be like, "So what happened with the Johnsons?" And they'd be like, "Oh gosh." So sometimes we can hear judgment, and so that can actually, I think this is more important than this is more prevalent than we know. When we hear judgment, um like towards I think even political figures,
Yeah.
like what an idiot, they're such an idiot, they're, or I remember hearing about political figures that messed up, or pastors that messed up. What an idiot, what are they thinking, leading all these people. I think even how we talk in our
Yeah.
home is important, because
Yeah.
then the kids they're making a conscious decision saying, golly, if you mess up, you get roasted
Yeah.
in our household.
Right. Yeah. And there's nothing that's going to shut down someone from wanting to go
Oh,
and, tell, hey, I'm struggling here. This happened
yeah,
to me. Then feeling like, well, if I do that, then I'm next on their hit list. Right.
totally. I'm going to be judged. So I
Yeah.
think even how we talk, um, I do want to give like a tool. Would that be
Yeah.
okay?
Absolutely.
And we were given this tool, so we did not come up with this tool, but this massively helped our family. And I really think set the course for us. Is our counselor gave us family meetings,
Mm.
and he said, and our kids were young enough where we could do this all together. Um, but we would get the kids together, and we would say, okay, it's time for a family meeting. The first rule of family meetings, we have fun. So we would laugh and be silly.
Mm-hmm.
Second rule of family meeting is whatever is said here stays here.
Mm.
Like the circle of trust,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, and so whatever we say here stays here.
Yeah.
And then we would talk about everything in life that we want, that is desirable, that is pleasurable, that is full of joy, carefree. That's all in the light.
Mm-hmm.
Everything in life that is negative and bad and yucky and gross and all the things is in the dark, is in secrets. So we don't keep secrets as a family.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm telling you, that was such a beautiful time. And it was, I remember our kids. It was a really special time.
Yeah.
I remember our kids saying things like, just crying, their little tender hearts, just saying, Dad, I've been lying. I'm telling my teacher I know how to do the math problems. I don't know how to do them.
Right. Yeah.
And my wife and I are kind of pinching each other. We're wanting to laugh because it's so, it's so innocent
Yeah.
and sweet. And but their little spirits are just like, they're crying.
Yeah.
And but what it did, as it started the trajectory, of intimacy
Yes.
and honesty.
Yeah.
Oh, and I forgot to tell you, the other rule of family meeting that's super important is it's immunity.
Okay.
This is an immunity zone.
Right. Yeah.
Whatever is brought to us, you're not going to get in trouble for.
Yeah.
But if we find something out that was being hidden from us, then that's when there's going to be consequences. And
Yeah.
so
That's
it's almost like they were wanting to get that into the light. And
Yeah.
so it actually, I actually really believe saved one of our sons. He actually, and this is so sad because I just saw how the enemy was trying to get a hold of him. Is there was another kid that was like was touching him at school,
Mm-hmm.
and he was a rule follower, so he didn't want to say anything. So under a desk, he'd start touching him really inappropriately.
Yeah, totally.
And they'd sit down for reading and do, and so and he came to us in a family meeting and he was just bawling. He said, "Am I going to get in trouble? I got to tell you guys something. Am I going to be in trouble?" And the enemy had already twisted it to like it was going to be him getting in trouble.
Yeah.
For something that he didn't initiate, for something he hadn't,
Yeah.
so disgusting.
Totally.
And so parents, this is what our kids are going through. These are the things that are happening. But because of those family meetings, he was able to say, "Mom and Dad, here's what's happening," and just lay it all out. Where I'm thinking about my own story, similar age, didn't come out till like I was 30 something.
Right.
He's telling us after it happens.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're able to like, be mom and dad and talk with him and work through. But family meetings were, I think, key. And then I would say, John, that we were super intentional in those years about adventure and about recreational intimacy. And if you want to get your kids talking, get them off the iPads, get them on a trail, get them on some bicycles, get them on a walk, get them to the playground, and oxygen, fresh air, blood flow, and being engaged with them in play. I know it sounds so practical, but man, I'm telling you, I think that helps set the stage for them.
And those are all things that require a guy to carve out time.
Mm-hmm.
It would be so much simpler just to kind of think of those things as not being as real high priorities in your schedule and in your weekly flow, but carving out time for a conversation with your one of your kids is that conversation will plant incredible seeds in their life. That you do that consistently, week after week, year after year. It's incredible the fruit that comes from that in the long term. And so, I hear you saying that you got to step into the conversation, even though you're not a professional counselor.
You were once a teenager. You were once a kid.
It's just a matter of conversing with your kid and beginning to have those conversations. And the younger you start that, the easier it develops as your children get older.
Yeah. And normalizing too.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. But normalizing when they do something, or they tell you something, like, don't be an idiot.
Right.
What does that do?
Right.
And I hear dads talking to their kids like that. Knock it off. Stop it. Instead of saying, "Hey, bud, that's super normal that you want to do that. That's really normal behavior. Let's disciple that."
Yeah. Men who feel shame put shame on others. Right. Yes. And so when I hear that, it automatically makes me think this father's got some stuff that he's ashamed about. And the thing he does not want is for his son to experience that same shame. So he's going to try and shame his son into not doing what causes him shame. And it just doesn't work.
It's like repetitive generational cycles. Yeah.
So the conversations are critical. The family meetings, I can attest, Sunday nights, we're kind of wrapping up the week. It's been a big day. So usually Sundays were a busy day for us. Kids are, getting pajamas on, and they'd come into mom and dad's room. We'd just kind of lay all over the couch and the easy chairs. And it was one of my favorite times. Yeah. But it was also one of those times where it would have been really easy for me to already be getting into Monday morning gear. And, as far as like getting ready for Monday morning and just not do it. And so being very intentional with our conversations, with our interactions, creating family time together where there's room for open conversations I love the guidelines to your family meetings. So I think those are just so wise, and so they allow for so much to happen within the course of that time that the sky's the limit.
Yeah.
And so I love that. It so these are just little practical pieces though that plant seeds that develop incredible fruit in your
Yeah.
relationship with your kids. And one of the things that can be difficult is really understanding as a father, how do I plant good seeds into my children's lives that's going to bear good fruit when I feel like I'm struggling myself. Like,
Yeah.
so as fathers who are struggling with their sexual purity, feeling like that they can actually struggle themselves, but also lead their children. You addressed this a little bit when you talked about, in the kingdom of the blind, the one-eyed
The
man is king,
Yeah.
and how, as fathers, we are always struggling. So in this conversation with Pastor Ben and I, we both are walking in levels of freedom that we did not before, but we're also both wrestling this out, fighting this fight for the rest of our
John
lives.
Harvey and I are impervious to sin, and because we have
Yeah.
that's no, I love that, and I think we're not, sometimes when we talk about sexual integrity, I think we hear sexual perfection, we hear perfection.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I have not yet reached perfection,
Right.
and I think what we're talking about is we're talking about a life that's lived in the light.
Yeah.
As we walk in the light as he is in the light, have fellowship one with another, I mean, the blood of Jesus continually cleanses us from all unrighteousness. And so if my trajectory, if there's not secrets in my own life, if I, and I think as men, we all need somebody that we're telling that knows everything. Everybody doesn't need to know everything, but somebody needs to know everything.
That's right.
And so there's got to be somebody that we're talking with. There's got to be somebody who's in our life, where there's accountability. And we're like, what a farce. Like, in what other area of life do we disqualify ourselves because we're not at perfection level?
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, I can tell my kids, I can give my kids maybe some health and exercise advice, and I'm not where I want to be right now.
Right. Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, and so I do think that there is, I think we just keep having the conversations, and then we just continue to walk in the light. We just continue to expose those things that we want to hide. We keep exposing and anything that's, we feel like is becoming a negative pattern, negative repetitive pattern. I think we just have to expose it.
Yeah.
And then I think, you're their dad. Like, you have this is we don't want to abdicate our roles.
Right.
And so we can, like, there's been times when I feel like I'm on the journey with my kids.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just a little bit further ahead of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think telling our kids our stories is really important too,
Yeah.
at age appropriate levels.
Mm-hmm.
My kids fully know my story.
Yeah.
And I think it helps them to understand. It kind of helps pull the camera back and go, oh, I had this experience with Don Potter's wife, Christine Potter, and she's gone on to be with the Lord. She's gone home to be with the Lord. But I was telling my testimony in Dallas, Texas, and her and Don Potter were there. And if you don't know who Don Potter is, he's one of the most amazing worship leaders on the planet. And Christine was just prayer warrior and inner healing. And so she comes over to me. She said, hey, I just want to pray some things over you and just seal some things up. And, so she starts praying for me, and she's like praying over my synapses. And I'm like, I didn't know you could pray over a synapse. She's praying over my nerve endings, and she's praying over like all this. And I kid you not, man, supernatural, like things are like actually shifting inside my body. I can actually feel like my body, I feel like it's flip-flopping and movements happening physically. And then she stops and she says, oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry this happened to you. I'm thinking, lady, I've got free will. Like, I made these choices, I made these decisions. And she said, oh, this wasn't your fault. And I'm going, okay, but I pulled the trigger, and I made these choices that caused so much damage. She says, this was planted in your generational line, um, in your lineage, like generations ago, and its desire was to kill you and to take you out. It was like,
Wow.
whoa. Kind of helped me pull the camera back and
Yeah.
go, yes, I pulled the trigger, but there was some generational stuff at work.
Yeah.
And it was coming to kill me.
Yeah.
And so that kind of
Gosh.
gave me a perspective of like, yes, it was my fault. Yes, I partnered with it, but there was a force. There was something that wanted to snuff me out.
Yeah.
You know,
It's so telling too, because how many times have I worked side by side with on job sites and just had things in common with men who were the most capable, strong, just great leaders, amazing guys, but they were so broken in this area that
Yeah.
it completely neutralized them and debilitated them, and they couldn't keep a marriage intact. They didn't have a good relationship with their kids. They were broken emotionally. So many different
Yeah.
there was a killing of their soul and their spirit that happened because of the sexual brokenness in their life. And from the outside you can just see this incredible man that God created, but you could also see the direct impact of generation after generation of work against him and his family line that was just so destructive.
Yeah.
And so we see that, which she was seeing big picture. We see that in the work in the lives of men day in and day out, where it's just like, what happened to you? And it's the result of a very strategic evil plan of the enemy to take out generations of men.
Yeah.
And it's so that cycle is so dramatic, and we see it all around us.
And it's propagated in silence.
Yes.
And it's propagated in shadows and in hiding, and just some really helpful tools is I think are some phrases. If and if your heart's kind of racing here, men, and you're like, okay, it's time. There's like a little litmus test for, do I need to tell somebody? And there's some phrases, give you a few of them. It's like, okay, if it happens again, I'll tell somebody. This will be the last time. When such and such happens, then I'll stop. It's not as bad as it used to be. At least I'm not as bad as so and so. It's only once a month. It's, these kind of phrases are really indicative that we're not trying to break free, and we're just, I have a great example. And my brain thinks of an example like this. If I go out to my garage every day and there's just a mess of, cables and cords and, all the things, and I just keep coming out to my garage and I'm looking and I'm just like, when are those things going to untangle themselves?
Yeah.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah, right.
It's, it's not going to, it's going to take intentionality of me getting down there. And if you've ever cleaned, a bunch of cables up or it's like, how did this get so twisted up?
Yeah.
How did this rope get, and there's an intentionality of you're finding and you're pulling and you have to kind of get down and do it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's, we're kind of in our lives, in our sexuality and in our sexual, again, this beautiful part that God made for us, for our pleasure, for our enjoyment, to strengthen covenant, to have children. It's so beautiful. And it's like, but if we are somehow expecting to one day walk out in the garage and everything put away and everything untangled, like we're deceiving ourselves and we just propagate it. I guess the garage is actually going to get messier and messier. And then our kid's garage is going to get messy, and it's going to, and then our grandkid, walk into his garage, it's going to look like a hoarder, totally. That's just how it happens. So,
and you could fast for 40 days and pray and ask God to come in and just clean up that garage. There's sometimes we are like pointing the finger at God and saying, God, why aren't you helping me with this? Why aren't you taking this away from me.
Mm-hmm.
And he's right there ready to help you, but we have to step into that.
Yeah.
And there's freedom available.
Yes.
It takes that step of faith, though, of saying, okay, I'm willing to walk in the light. And I can say from my own personal story is that when I began to come out and be like, this is what I'm struggling with.
Yeah.
And disclosed it, and then began to have men in my life who knew what was going on, and who I began to say, hey, you know what? I'm struggling here. Or for me, the big one, and we alluded to this in our last podcast, was for me, the big one is when my wife's around, I do great. She's great guardrails for me. She keeps, really. And but when she's out of town, that's when it's like the struggle for me is really, the battle's intense. And so when it comes to alcohol and pornography and those types of things, it's like, I have to tell my guys, my wife is out of town. Will you check in on me?
Yeah.
And then ask me, next week when you see me, how'd you do? That's all it takes, because there is so much freedom in that. I don't even, it's really amazing how, when that happens, how the struggle's very much not a struggle.
Because the light has come in.
Because there's light. Yeah.
There's light.
And it is a remarkable difference between trying to battle it out on your own. What, I need to go to bed, but
pull them up.
Yeah. And you're just kind of like trying to fight it on your own. Whereas all it takes is that one text. Hey buddy, my wife's going to be out of town, and it makes a huge difference. So bringing it into the light is huge. And understanding that, that you can continue to lead, your children in this and set them up for victory in this area. But the one key component there is that you have to be pursuing victory yourself.
Totally. You got to be walking in the light.
Yeah. And
not perfection.
Not perfection.
That's what, again, we get caught up in religion.
Yeah.
We get caught up in a religious mindset, and then there's this whole thing of like, we teach win the day, and a lot of guys need to like have their focus just be on when their head hits the pillow.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that really needs to, yesterday is history, tomorrow's a mystery. And today is what we got, baby.
That's right.
There's grace for today. And so, but sometimes what will happen is that when we do mess up, we'll almost go, well, shoot, we messed up. And so almost throw ourselves into the, a binge or like, but just to realize, man, when I make it, if I make a mistake or I have we just expose it.
Mm-hmm.
We just expose it. And so if you're in process, man, you can lead somebody else and have them be in process too, and check in with your kids and, having these conversations, normalize the conversation of sex and sexuality.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example I think is hilarious. So we're talking about, and one of our mutual friends, she's talking to her kids about sexuality. And she gave me a phrase. It goes into our eyes, it goes into our head, it goes to our heart, and it goes to our parts. And I was like, I wish I would have had that. That's really good. That's Jody Mamula told me that one.
Oh yeah. She's
I thought, that's awesome. And so, but I was like, but we were talking about, it's normal to be attracted to the female body. I was not told that, John.
Interesting.
Yeah. You kind of know that, but to hear, your dad say, hey buddy, it's super normal. And even talking about like things that are going to start happening to your body.
Yeah.
What is an erection? How do we talk about these things? How do we normalize to our kids that, it's okay to be attracted?
Yeah.
It's, you're going to think about these things, but what do we do with them and how do we steward that? And so one of my favorite stories ever is my son was at somebody else's house and a movie came on and there was topless women.
Okay.
And Ashton was maybe 10 years old. And let's be honest, that's any 10-year-old that sees that, that's going to cause further investigation, right?
Right, totally.
And so so he sees a topless woman for the first time. And we've been having these family meetings, and it's one of my favorite stories. He's in top bunk, and he calls me over. He is, Dad. So I come in his room. He's like, hey, Dad, because number one, he didn't hide it. He told us right away.
That's amazing.
He's like,
Yeah,
hey, this is what I saw. And we're like, buddy, that's okay. That's not your fault. It just shows how the enemy is just
totally.
fishing.
Yeah.
And it's not your fault. And then so he calls me over. He says, Dad, can't stop thinking about boobs. And I wanted to laugh.
Yeah, totally.
And I
Yeah,
said,
that's hilarious.
well, son, that's really normal. Instead of taking some of the religious lines and we just cast that thing and I just said, buddy, that's super normal. I said, God made you to be attracted to a woman's body. That's how we're made, son. And that's what's going to bring you and your wife together. And this is good. We're definitely ahead of time right now.
Yeah.
And so what are we going to do about it? And how are we going to, process that? And then being able to disciple him through not to take that to fantasy, and explaining then what fantasy is. And, so things
Right.
actually those moments, because there was openness and I credit our counselor for helping us to install the family meetings.
Yeah.
Cause that was just, I felt like that was fruit of it. And then I look back in my own life, or I'll tell my friends this story and they're all like, there's no way I would have ever said that to my dad.
Yeah.
There's no way.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, something as I look back, I have great parents. I honor them as well. I love them. But that was never even part of the conversation at all. I mean, we never addressed things about in a sexual nature or things of the soul, really, about how we're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
It was, so I hear that story and I'm like, man, the freedom that there would have been to be able to be like, talk to dad, and there was a sense of like, foreboding on talking about those kind of things when I was a kid because of the fact that it always received harsh judgment.
Yeah.
And so developing, I think that in this process of normalizing that type of conversation with our kids, there's freedom to bring things to the light, knowing that they can trust you with that information and that there's grace involved with it.
Yes.
And there's kindness involved with it. That, and when we look at our relationship with God, in my fathering experience, I learned so much about being a father from the way that God had fathered me and what I walked through with him. And so it was really interesting because when my kids would come to me and bring something to the light that they were devastated about, like the first time they smoked pot, we were out in the field and my buddy pulled out a joint, and it's like the grace that you were able to extend to them. And then it brought it to light so that then you could walk that through with them. And
it's beautiful.
And so I love that, but creating that environment where you're normalizing the conversation and to where your response to those types of things, to where you're not bringing shame into the scene, you're not bringing guilt and condemnation, but you're actually extending grace and kindness. And that grace and kindness is really what directs the child's heart in that moment.
That's right.
And allows them to feel like they can talk to you, as well as it allows there to be further conversation about it, to where it's like, hey, remember what happened? How are you doing with that?
Yep.
And continuing to guide them on that journey.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that's one area where it was one thing to disclose something, but it was another thing to actually walk with our kids down the path that they had just entered onto because of that, what had happened in their life. It was maybe the first time your son had seen topless women in this TV show they were watching or movie they were watching. And so then being with him in that journey is so valuable. What are some of the
instead of just like don't do that again.
Yeah.
And then you don't check in with them for another 3-4 years.
Yeah.
And
So
it's
how do you what are are there questions that you would use? Or I know you had the family meeting, which was a time where you could have those things brought to the light, but was there ever a point where you were like trying to kind of come in and be like, hey, how's it going, son?
Totally. And I think when the kids got older, it wouldn't be appropriate in a family meeting setting for
Yeah.
like the boys to be disclosing
Yeah.
in
As
front of
they
their
get into
sister.
teenage years.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
So I feel like the family meeting morphed into like one-on-one stuff, and then also knowing what your kids like, what kind of their love language is, and taking them out separately or one,
Yeah,
one by one.
totally. I
You
see
know,
that.
my kids all love going out to eat. So we have expensive love languages, but they like love going out to eat with dad, getting food or getting a coffee or golfing or going on a hike. And so getting them in those environments where they talk is so key. Yeah, I think asking, but sometimes asking, we have to develop a lexicon for what to ask, because I don't know about you, but we had old school accountability kind of groups when I was younger, and it was like these guys would get together and we go, "How you doing? How was your week? It was good," or "It was, man, I'm really struggling this week," um, or "The enemy is just really coming after me," or "I'm really going through a season right now." And our kids don't need ambiguity; they need concrete. Like,
Mm,
so we need specifics.
yeah.
Walking in the light is not about ambiguity.
Right.
It's about specifics, right?
Right.
What am I feeling? What was I thinking? Why, what did I actually do? It's more so like a newspaper reporter, kind of just, you're actually giving the facts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of like painting this like, and I think part of that is self-protection to a degree. We're still trying to maintain an image while trying to be vulnerable. And it just, I was actually just talking with a group of leaders this week, and I was like, "You guys, we have to get specific. This ambiguity stuff is just,
Yeah.
we can't do it."
Yeah.
And so I think um, one of the things that my wife and I teach us in our course is like finding out where the guardrails need to be placed and then putting language around the guardrails. For instance, um, if the kids are, and I think every especially young teenage boy and girl, I don't think they should have their phones in their rooms, you know. But as they're getting older, they have more freedom. So then we can have some guardrail talks, like, and to do this, it takes honesty, right? And this is a conversation where they've got to be honest with me and with their mom and with their, most importantly, with themselves, and say like, okay, every time, or not every time, when I act out or when I give into temptation, what are the circumstances around that? So it takes a little bit of investigation. And that's why walking in the light, I think, is so, you're able to be honest with yourself and able to look at things and go, okay, this is what really happens. So we call it ruthless truth telling. So you say, well, if I'm going to be really honest, you know, maybe a boy will say, 7 out of 10 times it happens, I'm in the bathroom with my phone. Boom, there it is. What's the common denominator? You're in the bathroom, locked door, you're shut, you feel alone, you feel isolated. Okay, so what are we going to do now? We're not going to take our phone into the bathrooms. Another kid might say, if I go into incognito mode on the internet, or if I use a browser that I know that it can't be, searched or historied,
Yeah.
is when I know that that's a point when I tend to go off road and make some really bad decisions. Or they might say, if I get into the search feature on Instagram or on TikTok with no, with like just to surf with no plan, then that's where I find that okay, perfect. Okay, you're being honest. You're being honest with yourself and with others. Now, how can mom and I help you to develop guardrails? So then my language isn't like, how you guys doing?
Right.
I'm like, hey, this last week, have you been on incognito mode?
So yeah.
I'm asking
Yeah.
specifics.
You're addressing the specific.
Have you taken the phone in the bathroom?
Yeah.
And it's like, if they have, it's not like,
right.
we have a little saying, and it doesn't really roll off the tongue, but we text it to the boys. We text it to Macy. Heather texts it to me. IFP, integrity, focus, purpose. And so we'll just ask them, okay, with where you're headed, is this where we want to go? No. And they know it. Yeah. They know it too. Yeah. And they're like, okay, you're right. So we're actually being really practical which is really spiritual.
Yeah.
And so, but it gives Heather and I a language to ask them, hey, did you guys have your phone? Did you bring your phone into your bedroom last night?
Yeah.
Did you, okay, well, you crossed a guardrail, and you might not have gone over the cliff, but you made yourself really susceptible. And then the other thing, like you said, John, is you gave us a great example. So when Brenda's out of town, is okay, if I look back over my life, it's when I'm traveling or my wife travels. Okay.
Mhm.
What is that? I'm ruthless truth telling myself. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up a guardrail, and the guardrail says that when she's out of town, I'm going to tell somebody.
Yeah.
So you've done that without maybe not knowing the exercise, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and then it gives you a language for your friends, the people in your life that you've given permission to say, John, when Brenda was out of town, how'd it go?
Mhm.
And then because you've given permission,
Yeah.
you're going to tell the truth.
Yeah, that's right.
And so I think that's the pattern that's worked for us.
It's so good. Now, do both you and Heather deal with these
Yes.
things in conjunction with each of your children,
Mhm.
or do you guys partner like with the boys? You kind of are better with the boys, and she's better with Macy. How do?
I would tell you that they will disclose everything to Heather as well.
Okay.
And I'll tell you, because of our situation, Heather jumped both feet into the fight.
Yeah. Oh.
And so she
Yeah.
just, you can't shock her. You
Yeah.
can't,
Yeah.
And so, Heather is my main person for accountability.
Yeah.
And I bring everything into the light with her. I bring everything to the light. I'm like thinking, okay, mate, because
Sure.
it's a constant
Yeah.
ongoing, right? We're like,
Yeah.
and so,
Gosh.
but I know that our counselor, he kind of gave us the option. He said, hey, for some people it can be your wife. For some people, your wife might not be equipped, but she needs to know that you're telling another man or
Yeah.
a group of men
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah. I think that's, yeah. It's so interesting when you're talking about these specifics, and I'm over here thinking, man, I was such a not specific father when it came to those kind of questions, because I would almost try and use like code to make it a little more comfortable for my kids to be like, hey son, how you doing? Are you solid?
Yeah.
And it was like, that was kind of code for, are you fighting the good fight? Or I'd say, are you fighting the good fight?
Yeah.
But it was never like getting down to the the nuts and bolts of things, and how are you really doing? It was,
Yeah.
and so I feel like
Are
that's
you watching people have sex on a screen?
right.
I mean, those are some questions
Yeah. But I'm hearing you, and I'm realizing that I could have been that much more specific in my question asking and in my conversations, but I never took it to that level. And I feel like that for a lot of guys, I just operated at a shallower level more easily and felt like it was,
yeah.
I never went there, and I should have. But I feel like that's something good for dads to hear is that you can actually, and I think that if you start this when they're little, like you're talking about, when you start this when your kids are little, as they get older, the conversations going to happen more freely to go into those specifics.
But it's never too late.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
I want people to hear that God redeems these things.
Yeah,
And your kids, I'm telling you, I still need my dad. I still want to talk to my dad about these kind of things. And I'm 45.
Yeah.
And so we can still speak into our kids' life at any age.
That's amazing. Yeah, because I'm still I'm still working to develop my love and my leadership with my kids and they're adults. And it would be very easy just to kind of settle with the way things have always been and just kind of keep that same plane. But it's like, no, there's more. Not that I'm trying to force myself into
or
their
make
adult
up for
lives.
anything.
Yeah, no, it's more like, but I want to grow in this. How can I be continuing to encourage and speak life into my kids and allow them to understand that, hey, I didn't do everything perfectly, but I'm still in process, and I want to encourage you in this process as well, because there's more for you, and you've even said where your dad has like called you or texted you at a moment where it was like super life-giving for you. And And so I want to be able to do that for my kids as
Yeah.
well. And so for dads who are out there listening right now, if you've got young children or teenage children, if you've got children just in general, how can you go deeper?
Yeah.
How can you get past where I was at with, hey, are you solid, to where it's like, hey, how are you doing in this struggle
Yeah.
in this specific area?
And again, I go back to telling your testimony, making sure that your kids know that what
Yeah.
you've gone through.
Yeah.
And I think is age appropriate levels, but I think is huge. Like, hey man, I really struggled with pornography. Here's
Yeah.
what it did.
Yeah.
I don't want to see you guys go through that thing. Um, you can't shock me with anything you tell me.
Right.
And like I'm here to fight with you.
Mm,
I'm not against
yeah.
you. And I think telling the story, because I think our kids know that something happened we know that our parents aren't perfect,
Yeah.
but if it's never spoken, or like if it's never shared, then the enemy's an isolator. He
Yeah.
wants to isolate people away from the pack, to feel like they're the only ones.
Yeah.
So if our kids know that we're with them,
Mm,
and we're not perfect, but
yeah.
we're in the fight with them,
Yeah.
and we believe in them, and we've walked through the same stuff,
Yeah.
and I think
Yeah.
it's so important.
It's so good. And I'm even here trying to remember what kid I've told what, how deep I went into my story with them. And just me having that kind of wrestle in my thinking is like, okay, there's opportunity for me to tell them more.
Yeah.
I'll never forget when my dad came to me. I was in my I was probably around your age, actually.
Hmm.
Maybe a little younger than you are right now. And my
Okay.
dad said, John, I want to take you out for lunch, and I have some things I want to share with you. And I'm like, well, that's odd for him to want to, plan something out. I mean, we would get together, when they had moved from Guatemala, where they were missionaries, up to the States here. We were beginning to hang out more and get more time in. Well, this was like, there was a serious tone to it. And we actually went out to eat, and I'll never forget, we were sitting in a restaurant, and he began just to share a story with me. And I was in my early 40s, and I'd never heard his story. And I remember my first thought was, why didn't you tell me this sooner?
Oh man.
And my second thought was, so many things began to make sense immediately when I heard his story. And then the appreciation of what an overcomer, it was amazing to me what hearing my dad's story did to me, in light of how I viewed him, things I understood, things in my own life that began to make sense. And so I can attest to the fact that
Yes.
hearing your father's story, it's not something to where, I mean, all it did was bring life to me and make me appreciate my father, and help me understand more of what was going on in my own life.
Yeah, I think there's a fear that if we share those things, we'll cut off our influence, and we'll cut ourselves off at dude, it's the opposite.
Yeah.
It is the total opposite. It's funny, disclosure, we often say this, and you nailed it, John, is disclosure. Like when I disclosed to Heather, like in my life, it's like Heather had walked in halfway through the movie.
Mm,
We met 18 years old, and when you walk in halfway through a movie, it's frustrating because everyone's laughing, and they're like, everyone's reacting, and you're going, why are you reacting like that? Why is everyone laughing? Because you don't fully understand the plot line.
yeah.
When I disclosed fully to Heather, she's like, oh my gosh, I understand the plot line.
Wow.
The movie makes sense now.
That's a great analogy.
And it's like, oh, I get the character development. And so when we do that with our kids, I think, man, it reminds me of something else. When I started to share my story, because when I got fired, I flew back to Alaska, and I got all my financial supporters in a room, and I confessed to them. I
Mm,
disclosed to them. And then I started disclosing, in churches, and I started, Jenny Donnelly started taking me around to all these women's events where I'm disclosing my story, and I'm like, okay, what's happening? And the Lord started using it
wow.
to unlock, women who had abortions, women who had been sexually abused. Secrets basically started.
Yes.
But I remember people coming up to me and going, like, whispering to me and going, like, I have the same story as you. And I'm like, oh my gosh, the silence
Mm,
is not doing it.
yeah.
It's actually us. And so as fathers, if we can
Yes.
tell our stories, it unlocks so much. And our kids will love, I believe that we're going to respect us. There's a magnetic something that happens
Yeah.
in honesty.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I look at my dad in a completely different light. I never knew what my dad had gone through, and it was devastating what he went through as a kid,
yeah,
and so now I look at my dad and I'm like, this guy is an overcomer.
yeah,
The fact that I had any semblance of a decent childhood and I had a great childhood is a direct result of the grace of God at work in my father's life. And to see what he was able to do in his family from where he was raised was just like, how in the world did you
yeah,
break those cycles? And
yeah.
so whenever I say that if I ever talk about any deficiency in my family growing up, it's only done out of honor and an understanding that that deficiency was nothing compared to what it would have been like if there hadn't been the grace of God at work.
Oh
And if my
man.
dad hadn't really worked his way through so many different
And
things.
you were probably able to to heal quickly and to really turn turn the corner quickly only because of the love
Yeah.
that your parents gave you.
Yeah.
And so that's, yeah, the honor and honesty, man, they can coexist. And
Yeah.
I honor my same with me. I honor my parents.
That's right.
I think I was able to not have my whole life shipwrecked because
Mm-hmm.
I had such amazing parents. I knew I was loved by God. I knew I was loved by my parents.
Mm-hmm.
I knew I was the righteousness of God in Christ Jesus. And that helped me, I think, after disclosure, just bounce back quickly.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you're a father listening to this and you've got adult children, teenage children, young children, wherever you're at on the journey, understand that you may have a sense that you've already blown it and that there's no way that you're ever going to be able to lead well in this area. But there's incredible hope,
Yeah.
and God is so good and he's so gracious to help us in this place. And again, we just want to speak hope into you. We want to speak into you the fact that as you step into healing, as you step into freedom, and you're willing to go and do to those deep places and do the hard work of working through this, that you're going to be able to tell your story in a way to where your children are going to be freed up in ways that will help them in their battles and in their journey as well. So be encouraged that it's not
Yes.
too far. You're not too far gone. That
Yeah.
you may feel like I have already blown it, or my kids are already grown, and I did a terrible job in this area. And I have to look at my own deficiencies as a father and understand that, you know what, the past is the past. I can't control that, but the grace of God is so good to where there's always hope for me moving forward. And
Yes.
and so even in this conversation, I am stirred in areas where it's like, man, I can grow. There's areas where I can grow in this area and continue to lead well and to see there be more life to where it's impacting my children, my grandchildren.
Well, even as we're talking, I'm thinking that my connections with my sons are so deep, and I want my and I'm so connected with my daughter in different areas of in emotional intimate or in recreational intimacy, physical intimacy, but I want to grow in my relationship with my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
She's 15,
Yeah.
and I don't want it just to be mom.
Yeah.
That's and so that's an area I'm trying to grow into.
Yeah.
Just to be really honest with you, is
Yeah.
like, how do I connect with her, at a deeper level as she's maturing into this young woman?
Yeah.
I don't know how to do that.
Oh,
You're a pro
oh
at that,
yeah, yeah.
John.
I leaned so much on my wife's wisdom, and I would actually have to go to my wife before going into those conversations with my daughters, because I would be like, I don't really know how to address this. I don't
Yeah.
know what to say or how to. And my wife was so good for me. And then again, just like everything we're talking about here, there's a sense where when faith is expressed, grace is released.
Yes.
You just take a step and you step into those types of places, and in faith, and God is so
Yeah.
good. He will honor your faith as a
Yes.
father. And if there's fathers out there who like understand that their kids have been exposed to and involved in pornography and even sexual sin. Is there any, so we've talked about, beginning to develop conversations with your children, beginning to share your own story with them, depending on where they're at,
Yeah.
you share your story appropriately. But if they have children who've been exposed to pornography and have been sexually active, is there any guidelines that they should take to be able to cut that off sooner than later, or to protect their children outside of just like these conversations? But is there anything that parents should do outside of that would help, man, prevent their children from going deeper into those areas more
Yeah, I
quickly?
think if you know that something is going on, I mean, there's preventative, and then there's like when we know that something is happening. Um, what we see is parents kind of sticking their head in the sand and trying to go like, oh, that didn't happen, it's not going to happen
Yeah.
again. But really, if there's a hook that's in your child, I think identifying, is there a hook? Is there something? Is there like this pull? And really going after it with everything. I mean, there's everything from, I don't think any young kid should have a device in their room. I
Yeah.
don't think a door should be able to be locked. I don't think kids should be able to take devices into the bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
There's some really great apps
Mm-hmm.
that are out there that help parents see what their kids are doing. But again, I guess, John, what I don't like, or what I see that's not effective, is if it's just a bunch of exterior things, and it's like this ladder of legalism to get out of the pit you're stuck in, and it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
Because this might shock the listeners, and I'm not trying to give people ideas here, but in the past, there's been people that have nothing on their iPhone, and except for the Bible app, and they've been able to access pornography through the Bible app. Yeah.
What in the world?
Because there can be Twitter links in Bible app to take you, or articles or things like that, and so people have figured out ways. I'm not trying to.
So they have one app on their phone,
the Bible app.
It's the Bible app.
If the heart,
yes,
if the heart's in darkness,
Yeah.
the heart will do.
Yeah.
It'll find a way.
Yes.
And so
Wow.
so it's discipling their heart.
Yeah.
I think it's the things that we talked about. It's the intimacy. It's the recreational. Because if it's just like, hey, I found this out, so we're locking down their life, and it's like,
Yeah.
rules without relationship is rebellion.
Yeah.
So I think we just have to continually foster conversation, continually build our pillars,
Yeah.
get the family meetings in place,
Mm-hmm.
tell our testimony, and then just be led by the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And like you said it really well, that sometimes we just got to embrace the awkward. I mean, I can't tell you how awkward it was. I remember taking Taylor by the hand and going for a walk and talking to him, having the talk with him.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt as scared as
Yeah.
I've ever been.
Yeah.
And but what a beautiful, I mean, God just led the conversation, and it was so beautiful, and he was so cute.
Yeah.
It was
Totally.
and it was like, whew, we did it. But we do hard things.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I feel like that there's a place there too where you have to shift your priorities to create more time to be present and to be available and to be a part of your kids' lives. That window of time, and you'll hear me say this all the time, that window is so short.
Yeah.
And it's so easy in that window of time to pour yourself into where you feel comfortable, to where you feel capable.
Yeah.
And your work can really just overtake your life to the point where that's your main priority. And then, your interaction with your kids, especially as they enter into the junior high and senior high years, they're starting to get busier and busier. Life's beginning to broken up. Like for me, it was easy when my kids were little and at home all the time to go home and have dinner, and we'd connect at dinner. But you start throwing in
driver's license,
sports practices,
Yeah.
games,
friends.
friends.
Yeah.
There's this slow release into independence that starts when they're, even prepubescent. You're just like, you got these 11 and 12-year-olds who's like, hey, can me and my buddies run over to the Jackson Shell Station and get Takis and,
Yeah.
Baja
Yeah.
Mountain Dews,
Yeah.
you're like, yeah. And so they're on their own,
Yeah.
for an hour or two, and you're releasing them into this independence, and you're seeing them maybe less and less. And you have to create that time. And one of the things that I've really appreciated about you and Heather is that you guys are incredibly, you bear a tremendous amount of responsibility in your work and in the different things that you've got going on, but you've always seemed to stay well connected at home. And so do you have any insight into how a man can like lead his life, still be able to do well in business, but yet also be able to be connected at home?
Man, I don't know if anyone feels like they're nailing this. I feel like we're all at a place where we would like to do better. Um, I think seeing them as my first ministry, though, seeing Heather is my most important human relationship,
Yeah.
and I actually think that's been good for the kids too to see that.
Yeah, I
I think
agree.
it's real safe for them to know that mom and I are in love, and
Mm-hmm.
we try to make them uncomfortable as much as possible,
Totally. Yeah.
just with our affection, and we try to gross them out as much as possible. But I think that realizing that, and man, John, I'm the way that I'm wired. I am so wired for connection that I can start feeling when I am getting disconnected from my family, and so I think a prioritizing of like, this is my, besides Heather, that I'm their pastor first.
Yeah.
And they're, and it is tough. It is tough as we're entering a new season of even being engaged, and I'm just realizing I've got 4 more months with this kid.
Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
he's under our tutelage, and so I know Heather's like being intentional about making weekly meetings with him, and just making sure, like it, it's prioritizing, man. It really is. And I know we love this idea of organic and things happening. Those organic things happening can happen inside of something that's scheduled too.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so I think that what we really tried to do is put ourselves in environments where we were together, you know, without iPads or phones.
Yeah.
So that means, hiking and adventures and travel and
Mm-hmm.
road trips. And um, I don't know if I'm answering this well. I just think that they're maybe even overcoming the idea that my kids wanted to spend time with me too. I think some parents are like, I don't know if they even like me or they
Yeah.
want to spend time with me. And
Yeah.
they're so engrossed in their entertainment and things like that. Just telling myself, no, my kids want to spend time with me.
That's
I
really good.
don't know if I'm
That's really
answering
good.
this very
Yeah.
well,
No,
but
that's really good. And I feel like that the reason why that's so hard to answer, it's a tough question to answer. It's because
yeah,
there's no formula to it.
no,
This is something to where we as fathers and men, we need to lead through this.
yeah,
I love how you put it to where it's like, I'm why you've got this ability to sense where the disconnections are beginning
yeah,
and you immediately respond to those because you don't want those disconnections to continue.
hmm,
And as your children get older, it feels like more and more of a fight because as they're stepping into more and more independence, oftentimes the they may not necessarily have that be their first choice would be to hang out with dad or to hang out with dad and mom. And so, but we have to step into that and be like,
yeah,
hey, I feel like that Brendan and I did a really good job of creating opportunities for us to be together that our children enjoyed
yeah.
to where
That's
they
good.
they wanted to be together. And so when it was like daddy date night, it was like I would always make a priority of we drive my truck from the time they were kids, they got gum or whatever I had in the truck. And so we did, and I knew each of my kids and I would interact with them. My one daughter loves story problems.
Hmm.
And it sounds weird, but I would ask her, I would make up story problems as we're driving. So, and we'd engage
I
with
love
this,
that.
if a train drives to Seattle, all the story problem things. And my other, my son enjoyed a certain type of conversation, and my oldest daughter, they were each different, but I would engage with them individually when we were together and then create a place where it was like, we're going somewhere where they want to go.
Yeah.
Maybe we're going to Dairy Queen and getting an ice cream, or we're going to the Nickel Arcade and going to play some video games. But we're going to go together and connect to where they enjoyed being with us. And so that's important. But I feel like that whole being able to have a discernment piece as to how am I doing. I've been working a lot and in a real busy season, and my kids have been really busy, but so maybe I need to take a day off of work and just be like, hey, I'm going to pull you out of school and we're going to go for a hike, or we're going to go do something together.
Yeah.
Because I had to be really intentional about shaping my schedule to where it was like, I'm going to be at their ball games. I'm not going to miss their ball games. And so I would schedule that into it.
Yep.
And then it's like, when are we going to connect, and scheduling that in. But then there was also times where it was just like, I knew that something had happened, and it was like, I've got to actually just call an audible here, and I'm going to take a couple hours off early from work and go be with this one of my kids. So that discernment piece is, it's not formulaic.
No.
There's certain things that you can schedule, like build the ball games into your schedule. Maybe the family nights, your family meetings, those get built into your schedule. But there's going to be times where you're just kind of calling, doing that audible, where it's like, I've got to go do something right now.
That's so good. And what just hit me when you were saying this, and I've actually felt this, and I've swung and missed on this, and I've hit it out of the ballpark on this, is there will be times when our schedules, and nobody's planned this, when we all just happen to like come to the house at the same time, and we're like, maybe we all sit down at the table, and it's in those moments, maybe I'm tempted just like to go lay in bed or watch. I feel an invitation of like, engage right now.
Yeah.
Engage right now. And I have engaged, and it has taken us to like where we're having like a deep talk.
Mm-hmm.
And I walk away and I'm just like, that was intimacy.
Yeah.
Or the other night, I think Yahtzee came out, or something came out as we all sat at the table, and it just kind of happened. And we ended up spending this beautiful quality time that we didn't plan. And I could have easily checked out.
I love that.
I could have easily gone to the gym, or I could have easily, but it was like, I feel like we're presented with these opportunities, and John, like you said, this window is so small.
Yeah.
And if we're constantly saying, oh, next time, I'll get to that.
Yeah.
Next time.
Yeah.
Man, ministry of presence.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. And the older your kids get, those moments when you're all together like that, they do come further and further, and apart, and taking full advantage of those opportunities is huge. This is so good. There is so much hope for men and their families. And if you're a guy out there and maybe you've gone through a divorce and you've got custody of your kids, man, this stuff's like gold for you when you have your kids with you for the weekend, or whatever time it is that you've got your kids with you, to be very intentional in these areas, and to really take the opportunity to begin to build this into your time with them. And in general, as fathers, this is an area where we need to be aware of the need for us to grow in our leadership in this area, but understand that it's a process.
Yeah.
And there's not pressure on you to get it all figured out and to do it all at once. The pressure is you taking the first step.
Yep.
And to begin to step into the awkward conversation, begin to look at an opportunity that the Lord gives you when you're out with one of your children to say, hey, I remember when I was your age and this happened to me and it was really hard. Yeah. And so I totally get where you're at and what you're going through. But what is it that you can do as your next step?
Yeah.
In your own personal freedom and also in your leadership in this area. And so as we wrap up the conversation, is there like one truth that you would want to leave with fathers with? And I know that we've talked about a lot of different things, but something that you might want to just leave with the fathers out there.
Oh man, they're not our kids are not looking for perfection. They're looking for presence. And our presence is as dads is so important with our kids. Our presence, to be present.
Yeah.
Present in conversation, present in in the areas of intimacy we talked about. Yeah, I think so many dads, again, we've talked a lot about this, but are like, I'll engage when everything's perfect, and nothing will ever be perfect. They want our presence.
Yeah.
And your kids, as broken as you think you are or are, your sons and your daughters still need you.
That's right.
They need you to be present. And I mean, I would just bless you and just say, you can do hard things, Dad. God is with you.
Yeah.
God is for you. And man, you might not be great at it right away, but you're going to grow into it.
That's right.
So yeah,
That's
so much hope.
Yes.
There's so much hope.
Yeah. And that is so true and powerful. And for the fathers out there who, even as you're listening to this, you're grieving because you've got children who you've lost connection with, children who have, children who have gone astray, and your heart's broken. That's such a difficult place, and we feel for you, and we see so much hope in that situation too, because God's even spoken to our church that this is going to be a year of the prodigal coming home.
Yes.
And so if there's areas where you feel guilt and condemnation and shame about how you raised your kids and how you weren't the man that they needed, and we just come against that right now, and we speak life into you. We speak identity into you, that you are still the man that God's going to use in the life of your children. And I want to encourage our listeners out there to learn the power of prayer.
Yeah.
To stand in the gap for our children, to pray for them, and we're not wrestling with our kids in these areas. We're not wrestling with our adult children in this area. We're wrestling against principalities and powers that want to destroy our children. And the ability for us to do all of these practical things that we've talked about, a lot of that starts with a position of authoritative prayer, where you begin to pray over your children. You begin to pray over their lives, their futures, your grandchildren. And so if you're the father of a child who you've just lost connection with, I just want to speak life into you right now, that you don't give up that prayer piece, that you don't give up fighting for them in the spirit and praying that God would return them back to him, and continue to reach out, never give up on that, and continue to humbly reach out to them and let them know you love them. Let them know, that no matter where they've gone, no matter what they've done, that you love them and that you're for them, and always allow there to be an opportunity for them to come back to you.
That's right.
And I love how my wife puts it. She's like, the robe and the ring came before anything else that the father asked his son about. In the in the story of the prodigal son, he ran to meet his son as his son was coming back, and he put the robe and the ring on him. Before, he was like, "Well, why did you blow all your inheritance? Why did you do this?" It was just this sense of love, and so that's a whole nother podcast episode, I feel like. But my heart for today is that every father out there would begin to take steps of faith today to lead his family well, to lead his children well, to be the father that God called you to be. Your assignment right now in this place is as a father.
Yeah.
And God, even as we read in 2 Peter chapter 1, God's given you everything you need. So step into your own freedom and step into the leadership that your family needs, with faith, with hope, shutting out the lies of the enemy, and walking forward in this place. And you will see God do amazing things in your life. And so, Pastor Ben, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your story and giving us so much wisdom. I love it. You have spoken into my wife and I's lives, you and Heather, and we've watched you, and it has impacted us tremendously, like no other person of influence in our life before.
Wow.
And I can say that honestly. And so it's an honor to have you with us.
I love you, John.
For you guys that are out there listening, if you'd like to connect with us, and reach out, because there's things going on in your own life where you're struggling with sexual sin and you're not walking in sexual integrity. Maybe you've got an addiction to pornography and just struggling to overcome in those areas. I would encourage you to look up Pastor Ben's
crosstheisland.com.
crosstheisland.com. Check that out. There are so many stories of just redemption and life coming out of that whole ministry. And so check out crosstheisland.com. As well, if you check out mobilizeman.com and sign up for our weekly email that we send out for just further encouragement, more building blocks to put in place into your life, you can go onto our main homepage on our website and sign up for the Waypoints Dispatch. It comes out every Friday. And so, yes, it's great to have you listening. Thanks for being with us on the journey. And until next week, stay on the path.